given a gift that's just ridiculous? Like, just mind-blowing? I've had a couple of times when I've been given a gift where it did not make sense. Probably the biggest one, now that I won that, my white truck, I won that. I don't know if I really won it. I'm suspicious of it. When we used to be in the showroom, the dealership Hudson Auto next door called me one day after we had moved out and said, hey, we have some mail of yours. Will you come pick it up? And I got in there and they had one of those big show checks, like a big, like a Publishers Clearinghouse thing. And they said, we do a drawing periodically. We do fundraising all year long. And your name was submitted by, there were several people submitted your name to be in the drawing and you won. And you have this much money to go buy to pick any car on the lot. And I was like, what's that catch? How much do I pay? And they're like, no, so it was really a generous thing. I feel like some people in our fellowship and friends had something to do with that. But, and it just didn't make sense. I'm still so grateful to have a truck that works, a vehicle that works. On the other end of the spectrum, and I don't know how you equate this. There was a time when the kids were little, when I had just got out of rehab, and we didn't have any food. I had gone into our camping equipment and got MREs that we saved for camping, and we were pretending to have camping day because the payday wasn't for a couple days. And we didn't tell anybody this, we didn't send in a prayer request hoping someone, we're just in that spot. And we heard some noise and went out to the front door, and there were 4 bags of groceries sitting on the front door, on the front porch. And I don't know who gave it, don't know why. But that was one of those weirds where just ridiculous gifts. And today we want to talk a little bit about this idea of ridiculous gifts. The idea of greed and generosity. And I know that sounds like that sounds like it's going to be the pastor yelling at you about giving. I swear to you that's not what this is. It does touch on our view of prosperity and wealth and our resources, but it's about our heart and our mind. And so I want to talk about this. Also, I realized just sitting back here for a while, I'm like 100 miles away from you guys over there. Now I know why you guys sit over there. Cookie, I should need to be right up where Cookie was. There's this weird little story as we're talking about, as we're moving toward Easter, preparing for Easter. And this idea of Jesus being anointed by the woman in Bethany. And it starts, though, it's a great comparison of the first point is that there's blindness and greed on one part, and then sight and generosity on the other. And we'll just start here with the first story. In Mark 14, 1-5 says this. It was now 2 days before Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. And the leading priests and teachers of religious law were still looking for an opportunity to capture Jesus secretly and kill him. But not before the Passover celebration, they agreed, or the people may riot. Meanwhile, Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon, a man who had previously had leprosy. And while he was eating, a woman came in with a beautiful alabaster jar of expensive perfume made from the essence of nard. And she broke open the jar and poured the perfume over his head. Some of those at the table were indignant. Why waste such expensive perfume? They asked. It could have been sold for a year's wages and the money given to the poor. So they scolded her harshly. Fascinating little story. So it starts, of course, the powerful leaders, and again, this is talking about the idea of, we're going to talk a lot about the love of money. What does that mean? And Judas and the religious leaders definitely had this love of money, love of prosperity, love of comfort, love of control, love of power, those things that money gives us. And the religious leaders were so blind to who Jesus was, and they so much wanted to eliminate his influence and his disruption of their world that they wanted to eliminate him, literally. They did not see the real issue. They did not see the real heart. They did not see the real Jesus, the Messiah that they supposedly were looking for. They wanted to be and needed to be and were used to be being in control to keep things stable and secure. They were the official first law and order people. They believed in the actual law, and they wanted to keep order. No riots, no people complaining, keeping us in charge so that we can dictate and for the good of the people, make sure that the law is enforced and people stay in their lane. They wanted to placate Rome and pacify the people and keep everyone in line to follow the law of God and enforce it and control it as themselves, their interpretation and their power. And at the same time still wanted to keep a riot from happening and having them killed themselves. And I love the way this is stated. It's almost like, do you remember the old Batman show, the 60s one? That would spin. I can hear the sound effect. Meanwhile, okay. Meanwhile, Jesus in Bethany having a meal. There's all sorts of discussion. Each of the Gospels, the three of the Gospels talk about this event, and they give different details and different timeline. Some assume that Simon the leper was someone Jesus healed. We don't know if that's true or not, but we do know from here he was someone who had leprosy. It wouldn't be a leap to assume that Jesus healed him. And while he's eating there, a woman comes in, and some say it's Mary, Mary Magdalene, some people say, but we don't know that for sure. But a woman comes in with this beautiful alabaster jar, this expensive perfume and oil. And she comes in, and with this, and here's the ridiculous part. This is what made me think of the truck and the food. It is a ridiculous gift. It is a bottle of perfume that costs a year's wages. Think about that. Also, it had ridiculously expensive packaging. I don't know about you. I am a sucker for good packaging. I figure if I go to the store, if they can make a good package, they probably make a good product. I'm not a very discerning consumer, right? So there are times I think about, like anytime I've bought an Apple product, not like a Honey Red Delicious, but like a Apple computer or watch or phone or something like that, the packaging's amazing. You open it up and there's, it unfolds and I think the trumpets play when you open it and there's confetti. It's amazing. It doesn't necessarily mean what's on the inside, but this thing, not only was the packaging amazing, but what was on the inside was good. Right? And to open this, you had to break the jar. So you can't use some of the oil. You got to use it all. So you break the neck of the jar. And it's the soothing, medicinal sign of respect and honor, and she pours it on Jesus' head. And then, when she's honoring the one person who was the literal guest of honor, who was the Messiah, who had changed all of their lives, she gets yelled at. Got to admit, does that not sound like the church? Right? Somebody comes in and they think they're doing this great thing, and some of us who are curmudgeons, I put myself in that, sometimes we go, pfft, right? We scold her. So this 300 denarii, 300 days' wages, a year's worth of wages, and they scold her because she had the priority, the perspective that seemed extravagant. It seemed off base because it was not their priority. And there's all sorts of assumptions and things we can think. One, I think in John it says that Judas and some of the disciples were upset, and we know that Judas was the accountant who was holding the purse, would carry the money, dealt with the money for the disciples and for Jesus. And a lot of them say because he wanted to siphon off a little bit of that money, and that if it was sold, then he'd be the one in control of it and could take some. We don't know that. I think, though, he wanted to be in control of it, and that he was going to decide, it's his perspective, how that money could be best used to honor Jesus, rather than actually honoring Jesus. Right? Right? There's some power when we get to decide who gets the benefit of our largesse. And they use give to the poor. Anytime somebody, especially in a church or in a nonprofit or in an organization that's trying to do something good, wants to do something and we don't like it, boy, that is the first thing we can throw up. Yeah, but what about the poor? It is to be who, you hear me preach about this often. Yes, that should be our goal. We should be caring for the marginalized, giving tangible help to those who need actual help. And we need to make sure, though, we don't use that as an excuse to just squelch somebody else's generosity, because we want to be in control of it. It's amazing that those who sometimes use that complaint so often, and very often, there's no poor actually get the help. I got to admit, this is another little tangent. I hate fundraising marketing, right? So often we see this, that there are pictures of someone in a ministry-branded t-shirt smiling and handing and helping somebody who's poor and giving them something. And all of that is good. It is fine to do that. I think it's great. But to take pictures of them and to post them around and to use it to show, look how great the great work we're doing, is so dehumanizing so often to the person receiving the help. Sometimes I feel like they're here, you got to sign this waiver. There have been ministries that I've worked with before where they say, to be honest, there's some missions that if you want to go in and get food, you have to sign a waiver that they can use your likeness in their marketing and fundraising. I hate that. Right? They're used as a prop. It's humiliating. And so often we want to be in control of how that's used and who gets the help and who gets it and how it's directed. And so often we want to be the ones deciding. We want to decide on the programs and pastors decide. I got to tell you, this is a tough sermon to do. I was looking at myself in a lot of this. Because sometimes by default I get to decide, and I want to make sure that's not me, that's not what I'm doing, that I'm listening to God and listening to the people who are giving. And they did have a point. It was an extravagant gift, and maybe even excessive. But if you're going to be extravagant and excessive, that is the time and the person to be extravagant and excessive with. The person of Jesus. She was using it as it was intended to be used. That expensive one shot of perfume was to be used to honor someone who was at high level, someone who needed honored, someone who deserved it. And who else? Who was that made for? I don't know if it was made for Jesus. I'm sure it was made for a priest or a king or someone else in high influence, and she used it on Jesus. It was used as it was intended to honor Jesus, and they scolded her for offering it to Jesus. Have you ever been scolded? We were all scolded as kids, I'm assuming. Some of you look around and I go, you were scolded a lot as a kid. But have you been scolded as an adult? It's awful, right? At work or something like that. Sometimes I get randomly scolded just living life. You ever had that kind of where they've obviously got some kind of weird problem or they're dealing with something and they yell at you for something you have no idea? I had this happen the other day at the grocery store. They have the little conveyor belt thing, and this woman had her stuff, and she was up there at the register and putting her stuff up. And so I, like you do, I got up there and I put the little divider up, and there was probably 2 feet between the divider and her stuff, and I started piling stuff up, and the checker goes, "She hasn't finished yet, sir." And I went, oh. And I felt so bad, like, oh, was I pressuring this woman or whatever? And so I took my stuff and put it back in the basket, and I'm like, have I been doing this wrong my whole life? Like, is there some etiquette that I missed? Are we supposed to, do you wait until they're all done before you put your stuff on? And then I got up there and I told the checker, I'm really sorry. And she goes, I'm so sorry. She goes, I was not paying attention. I thought there was something else going on. I realized, oh, she's having a bad day. She gets a pass. But they scolded this woman who was doing something right. And I think, though, in their mind, in order to please God, we're going to yell at this woman for pleasing God. There's a New Testament passage that talks a little bit about this as well. Look at 1 Timothy 6, 5, and then 9 and 10. It's talking about people who love money. Now again, I want to be really careful here. There's a difference between greed. When I use greed, it's probably not the best word, but I was trying to be alliterative. Loving money is different than having money. Loving money is caring only about it. And now I think I've seen wealthy people and I've seen poor people who love money. So this is what God says about loving money. This is Paul writing to Timothy. He's talking about people who love money. They're always cause trouble. Their minds are corrupt. They have turned their backs on the truth. To them, a show of godliness is just a way to become wealthy. But people who long to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And some people craving money have wandered from the true faith, and pierced themselves with many sorrows. I think greed, when we think of greed, we think of a Ebenezer Scrooge. But I think it shows up in different ways. The loving money can be couched in so many positive terms that we have to really do some constant self-evaluation to make sure we're not doing that. Saving and hoarding. Loving money doesn't always feel mean. It's making money the priority and the deciding factor in most of our decisions. I learned this way back when I first started studying politics, way back in college in political science. The number one issue that people, especially in America, use in voting is, will my taxes go up? Will my taxes go to somebody that I don't think they deserve it? Where money becomes the only value. And in fact, if my taxes are come down, I'll overlook a lot of stuff. Loving money looks like this: overlooking cruelty and care and violence to make sure our taxes are low. Loving money looks like make sure no one else gets any benefit that I don't get. Man, we're like that. Well, that's not fair. How come they get that and I don't? I find myself doing that at getting samples at Costco. How come that guy? Right? Finding reasons not to be generous and redefining needy for those who deserve and don't deserve. Denying systems that keep people poor. And assuming it's probably their own fault. Man, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I did read one pastor who wrote an amazing article about the fact that how often his heart was struggling when he was in his ministry, where he started deciding who deserved help and who didn't. And the one group that he kind of decided they weren't going to help is people who, it's their own fault they're poor, and repenting of that. I was super convicted. I would like to think I'd be super compassionate to those who have struggled with addiction. But I kind of have my limits. Sometimes I'm like, well, I got better, how come they can't? And I need to repent of that and still offer help. Making sure I've got mine and me and mine, and I have my safety net all locked up first, and then admiring and listening to someone just because they're wealthy, assuming they're smart, better, wiser, or worthy because they have wealth. Loving money is hoarding and control and security and power. When we make those things our goal, it's so easy to start loving the things that allow us to have security and control and power, and so often in our culture it's money. And so like Judas and the other disciples that were outraged at this generous gift because they wanted control and influence and esteem with the money. Also using piety and religion. Just like they're saying, hey, we'll give to the poor. That causes trouble. It causes their minds to be corrupt. The corruption when used here is the idea of being rotted, something that's rotted away, that started out good and has gotten gross and rotted like wood. I got up this morning. Again, I don't know what time it was because of the time change. It was either 3 or 9. I don't remember. But I was trying to keep the lights off to not wake up the dog. That's where I've gotten in my life by now. That my main concern is letting that dog sleep. So I got out an English muffin, and we had 2 left in one packet, and I had got another packet. Anyway, long story short, I broke it apart like you do, and it was just green inside. It had rotted. It had gone corrupt. It didn't taste bad, but yeah, you put enough cream cheese and butter on it, it's fine. But when we focus on amassing wealth for control and security and power, and that we want the purpose, that's when it goes bad, when we begin to focus on that rather than on generously and following the example and teachings of Christ. It's turning our back on the truth. And then using godliness as a way of gaining wealth. I want us to always be aware of that. We should all hold each other accountable. Hold me accountable. If I never want to use this as a way to get rich, clearly that's not working, for one. But also Not just get rich. Again, it doesn't matter the amount. If that's all I'm thinking about is how am I going to gain security? How am I going to gain control? How am I going to gain power? I need more. If that's what I'm thinking about, whether it's 5 or 5,000, it doesn't matter. It's corrupting. It causes us to fall in temptation, trapped by so many types of sins. When that becomes our focus, security, power, and control, when that becomes our focus and we use wealth to do it, is the root of all kinds of evil. And I think if we start going on, if we went back, one of the things I loved to study at one point, I did a thesis on Watergate, and that old line, follow the money. If we see anything evil in the world, I hate to say it, but follow the money, right? It's the love of money. Someone made a bad decision to gain more control and power and security. So again, it's not the amount, it's not having or not having that is moral or immoral. It's making that the reason we make decisions. And the result is that we wander from the faith and pierce ourselves. One pastor that I was reading this week talked about the focus on money and wealth, security, control, and power causes us to compromise our morals and our ethics and exchange it for a glimmer of prosperity. So we need to be generous. And again, generous not in a way that we're like saying, hey, why did you honor God? And let's take that perfume and sell it for $300 so we can decide. I was thinking of some of the ways that ministries and people that we can do this, that we want to distribute generously, but we want to get credit. We want to demand a say. We want power, whether it's in a nonprofit or a church or government. We want a seat on the board. We want to say, when I have this, I want to decide who gets the help. That gives me power. Demand recognition. I demand thanks, gratitude, a plaque. Demand oversight, control. Do they deserve it? Are they doing enough on their own, making sure there's some benchmarks? And again, not all of these are black and white. I'm just saying that these are sometimes the tricks we play on ourselves to allow ourselves to focus purely on prosperity. And we demand a return. Security. Sometimes we give it, I think that's one of the movements in the church that's been sad, that if you give X, you're going to get tenfold back. Right? You've heard that? That it's really an investment. We want security. We want to make sure that I always have enough in my retirement or I have enough in my bank account to make sure. And yeah, I'll give if God promises to give me more back. Then we're really blind. We're blinded by greed. And again, not cartoonish greed, but subtle greed that creeps in as we look for power, control, and security. But then there's this beautiful picture on the other side. Sight and generosity. The perception that this woman had is so touching. One of the things we talked a little bit about Lent, we don't do Lent as a tradition, but sometimes we kind of get Lenty. We want to take this time to prepare for the resurrection. And one of the values during Lent is almsgiving, that old term of giving to the poor. That's what alms are, giving alms, almsgiving, giving money or food to the poor. And I love this. So Mark 14, 6 through 9 says this. And Jesus, remember, they just scolded her. Jesus replied, leave her alone. I kind of could think Jesus wasn't always like, my brothers, leave her alone, right? I feel like this is one of those moments where he's like, hey, leave her alone. Why criticize her for doing such a good thing to me? You will always have the poor among you, and you can help them whenever you want to. That's a great line. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could and has anointed my body for burial ahead of time. And again, what are you talking about? Right? I tell you the truth. Wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed. Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that be cool? Jesus saying, hey, by the way, when the gospel's talked about, they're going to remember what she just did. I love this line. This gets confusing. This line, you'll always have the poor among you. Right? Sometimes that's used as an excuse like, well, we can't help the poor. It's never going to do any good. No, I think Jesus is going to say, no, that is going to be your constant job. You're never going to solve it, and you always have to work on it, right? How often has he talked about helping the poor? This doesn't negate all of those sermons, all of that preaching, all of that example, right? No, he's like, hey, you'll always have the poor among you. And I love this, and he goes, and you can still help them any way you want. You can still give to them, right? Just because you didn't get to use this 300 denarii doesn't mean you can't go out right now and help some poor people. Right? The mission will always be with you, but you won't always have Jesus. He's like, you won't always have me right here with you. And in fact, she's anointing me. I'm going to die here real soon, and I don't know how many different ways I can tell you this, because he told the disciples over and over, hey, this is coming, and they kept going, yeah, we don't get it. What are you talking about, right? But he's like, she had the real perception. She saw right through what was going on. She had the better vision of what was happening and what was valuable. Not the 300 denarii, but a connection with Christ. She had the sight, the true spiritual sight. And whenever the good news is preached, whenever the gospel is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered. I love this, the idea for all time and history, as we talk about the good news, the example of the good news will be this woman. We may not even really remember her name. We don't know for sure who she is. But that deed of honoring Christ first with something extravagant and ridiculous will always be remembered. That's the example. We all know the passage that we just read from 1 Timothy that says, the love of money is the root of all evil, right? We memorized that at some point probably. I like how it goes on though. 1 Timothy 6:6-8. Yet true godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. After all, we brought nothing into this world when we came into this world, and we can't take anything with us when we leave it. So if we have enough food and clothing, let us be content. I like this idea too. He's saying, hey, look, the key is contentment, right? Not getting more, not having none. The point is, if you've got enough food and you've got enough something to wear, then be content. Now, if you have more than that, that's fine, as long as you're not loving it, as long as that's not your goal. And if you don't have more, if you're poor and all you've got is clothes and food, and all you can think about is getting more, and that's your whole plan, and that's how you make all your decisions. Or you have a lot, and all your decisions are, how can I get more, or keep what I got? Both of those are the love of money. But he's saying, no, that's the real godliness, the real wealth is being content with what we have. So there is some boundaries. There's some practical truth here that, hey, yeah, we need food, we need clothes. Yes, take care of you and yours. That is good. But the key is contentment. Contentment with the power and the security that we have. That is true godliness. That is true wealth. And it makes sense, right? If we're content with what we have, then we can be willing to give it away. We can be willing to have more. We can be willing to love others, even if it means sacrificing, because we're content. I got to admit, I struggle with that. Right? There's too much marketing around me. There are too many great packages. And I always find myself, I need just a little bit more. Right? Oh, I'm worried about next month's bills. Right? I heard a great example. Talked about Scrooge a couple of times. Great example of one of the paradoxes of Scrooge. We think he was greedy and he was greedy, right? That he was an evil man who was mean, and he was exploiting the poor. But there's this one scene where Kermit, that's the only version you should ever watch, by the way, where Kermit is asking to put some more coal on the fire in the office. And Scrooge is like, no. Scrooge had all the money in the world. But here's the perspective that this guy was talking about. Scrooge was in the same cold office. Rather than spring for another lump of coal to heat the office for his workers and himself, he was miserly. He was so worried about money that he wouldn't even be able to enjoy it himself. He was not content. He needed a little bit more and was willing to make his own life suffer. He was literally rotting and corrupted. If all we care about is getting more, if all we care about is security, then we begin to not be able to live life, then we begin to not be generous with others and generous with ourselves. So let's remember what is the best use of our resources, to honor God and help the poor, and that honors God. And then we are truly wealthy. Let's not be so, and I have to tell myself, let's not be so discontent. Let's be content with a little or a lot. Make sure that that is not our goal, that is not what we love, that is not our measure for our own success or the success of others, and that we follow Christ instead. Let's have the perspective of God and the kingdom of God that is generous and seeks to give alms and honor to others. Alms to others and honor to Jesus. Let me pray, then we're going to watch the benediction video, and then we'll close. Jesus, thank you so much that you love us so much that, God, you give us everything we need. We need to remember that when we pray before a meal, God, remind us to thank you that you've given us our daily bread. Thank you that gave us clothes to wear and food to eat. And frankly, God, even the poorest among us here live in a place and in a society where we have enough. We have enough. And God, when we worry, when we're worried about our future, and God, we're on a fixed income and we don't know how to pay the bills, yes, God, it is stressful, but help us to turn to you and not scheme and be willing to compromise our morals and our love for you to get more. Help us to trust you and to be thankful for what we have. And God, with our excess, with our others, help us to be generous and not use it for control or esteem, but just want to help people the way you did. So God, thank you for this amazing example. Help us to be the kind of people who give extravagantly to honor you. And God, we love you and we thank you. And help us to be people who honor you and are content. In Jesus' name, amen. Hebrews 13:5. Don't love money. Be satisfied with what you have, for God has said, I will never fail you. I will never abandon you. May we be people who choose to honor Jesus with our wealth and make him and his teachings an example, our perspective, and our goal, and reject the pursuit of wealth for power, security, and control. To the glory of God and the flourishing of our neighbors. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.